Hello and welcome to the View from Sibos 2020, being held virtually for the first time ever. I'm Joy McKnight, Managing Editor at The Banker, and with me, via video link, is Ed Thurman, who's Managing Director of Global Transaction Banking at Lloyds Banking Group. Ed, thanks so much for joining me.
Good to see you.
So what impact has the COVID-19 pandemic had on the UK?
Well, I mean, we're not alone in this, but it's clearly a pretty unprecedented situation. The impact has been pretty dramatic. So the pandemic, and then the lockdown, and then obviously as we've started to see the restart and the easing of some of these lockdown restrictions, I think there's a couple of things to call out. I think initially, the situation was really very much a crisis of cash flow and then working capital, and now it's a question of resilience. And so certainly the policy response in the UK was pretty emphatic from sort of March, April time. So if we think back to that point around it being a crisis of cash flow, then the government acted very quickly, either in terms of some of the government loan schemes, the bounce back loan schemes, the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, the larger version of that, the commercial paper piece as well. And then that was then augmented with things like the furlough scheme, so the job retention scheme, VAT holidays, and so on. And so, what we saw was, very clear action to enable businesses to be able to preserve cash. And that, I think, was a pretty decisive move that took place in those first few months. We obviously then supported that with additional kind of forbearance. So whether that's around the extension of overdrafts for fee-free, we restructured in the transaction bank on the asset finance business something like 18,000 leasing contracts as well, just to build that additional forbearance and, for example, things like capital repayment holidays. So, that was very much that initial period where it was really a question around working with government around making sure that we get the right cash flow support in place for British businesses of all sizes as they went into that lockdown period, and then effectively reset. And as we're going into the restart point now, so the bank was very clearly committed to supporting that effort, and then putting our clients in a position where they can start to think about how to trade out of this. But the impact has been dramatic. And again, you look at balance sheets, you look at the credit extension through these different schemes. We're up to, I think, over 9 billion now for Lloyds. And obviously we're seeing a lot of cash that's being held on balance sheets as well. So the balance sheet shape is quite different to what we were probably planning for, obviously. But there's good reason for that, and I think we feel certainly committed to continue to provide that support across the corporate and business space.
Excellent. But how has the pandemic really affected your correspondent banking relationships?
I think clearly what we have seen is the impact of the lockdown and the pandemic has obviously impacted payment flows in and out of the UK as well. So actually the volume of that we've seen across the network has probably been impacted, albeit starting to come back now as well. But the quality of that network and the quality of those relationships remains high. And actually, there's a real sense of continuing. I would say that in the last 18 months or 2 years, the dialogue has moved from purely a transactional relationship to, how are we thinking about innovation? What are the kind of new ways in which we can think about working together on a cross-border basis? And that hasn't stopped, actually, Joy. And I think actually in some ways the speed of the sort of innovation agenda has probably ramped up over the course of the last few months.
Excellent. But do you think that it's the time now to really rethink that correspondent banking model?
To be honest, I think it's been a topic of refinement and continued alignment, if you like, over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. I think back to my old job, running financial institutions, we did a lot of work around optimizing that. I think, the correspondent banking network is incredibly important to us. That's how we as Lloyds, get our international reach that's important to our clients. So it's always a massive part of our franchise and a huge part of our business. So, the rethinking, I think, is already underway. I think what's interesting for us is, as I said, on the innovation side, how do we think about, slightly non-traditional ways of those to support those cross-border flows? Obviously we've talked a lot, and we've got virtual Sibos coming up, and so everyone will be talking APIs again. again, that's a really interesting area for us. And actually, one of the things that we're looking at with some of our correspondent banking partners as well. So how do we join up faster payment system to faster payment system? And again, it feels like that is something that is gathering more momentum. It's been in discussion for probably 2 or 3 years, but actually it feels like it's, as I said, certainly getting a bit more structured.